History of a Teacher by Famous Fault. Chapter 7. The House Elf. When Yugi entered the classroom Monday morning, he noticed at once that something was wrong with the students. Most of them seemed to be down because of the unexpected increase of power Umbridge had gotten, but some others were looking at him with an odd expression on their faces. Yugi frowned. He liked the students and didn't want them to think ill about him. Had he done something wrong?
"It's the same four," Atem pointed out after observing the students for a while. "Dean Thomas, Hermione Granger, Ron Weasley, and Harry Potter. Though don't worry about it now, partner. You still have an enthralling class prepared for them."
Yugi smiled at Atem's reminder. Surely he had something planned for the 5th years. He shrugged the feeling of unease off and took a bit of chalk. The talk among the students died away as they saw that he was ready to start class. 1939 to 1945, Yugi said as he wrote the 8 numbers on the blackboard. "What does that tell you? Let's make a mind map." Theodore Knott raised his hand. "Yes, Mr. Knott," Yugi offered. "Gellert Grindelwald was defeated by Albus Dumbledore in 1945. No, 39 doesn't tell me anything," Knott said with a shrug. Yugi smiled. "I'll take your word for it, but that's not what I was referring to. Some of you should know, I'm sure of it." Miss Granger hesitantly raised a hand. "Do you mean the Second World War?" "Very good, Miss Granger. 5 points to Gryffindor. Of course I mean the Second World War," Yugi said, and his smile broadened. He had been longing to tell them this, and he was looking forward to their reactions. "What's that?" Pansy Parkinson whispered to Blaze Zabini. Zabini shrugged. "I don't know, never heard of it." Yugi's smile evaporated. "I know that among some of you this kind of history is not common, yet someone must be able to tell me who the most important person was in Germany before and during the Second World War." Dean raised a hand, though he seemed rather hesitant. "Yes, Mr. Thomas," Yugi offered. "Adolf Hitler, sir. He took power over Germany in 1933, though he was already very active before that," Dean Thomas said. "Correct, another 5 points to Gryffindor. Just to see where your knowledge lays, how many of you know what the Second World War was?" Every Gryffindor, with the exception of Lavender Brown, raised his or her hand. Only half of the Slytherins did the same thing. "Now that's good. There is use in me teaching this to you. 30 years ago, when teachers tried to teach this subject at schools, there was actually no use. Everyone knew what had happened anyway. Especially 20 years after the war, when all the horrors had surfaced. Many children had fathers that had fought in the war that gave their children first-hand information that outran the information they received at school by far. This day, still, there are grandfathers that tell their grandchildren what happened. Grandfathers that survived in the battles, but perhaps more importantly, those that survived the concentration and extermination camps. Any of you who are familiar with this?" Seamus raised a hand. "My grandfather fought in the war. He survived, though he suffered from battle fatigue afterwards. He never really got over it. You could see it in his behavior all the time." We'll learn about battle fatigue, earlier known as shell shock, too. Though today I'll introduce you to what happened before the Second World War and how it could lead to such an incredible slaughter, Yugi said with a frown, suddenly being reminded that he wasn't the only one who suffered. "That's Muggle history," Draco Malfoy accused Yugi. "I should have told Dad about you. He would have kicked you out by now." "No," Yugi said, lowering his voice to a low and threatening tone. "He wouldn't have. He couldn't have. I've told you once before that I'm not powerless." Yugi felt at time just underneath the surface of his conscience, and the power of his Millennium Puzzle was flowing through him. When he had just solved the puzzle, he wouldn't have been able to hold Atem back, and Atem would not have hesitated to grab the chance to punish Malfoy. But now both Atem and Yugi were more aware about both each other and their environment. Atem knew that Yugi would disapprove if Atem played a shadow game with Malfoy, and Yugi was strong enough to push part of the shadows away. With Atem's help, he suppressed them. "What can you do?" Draco Malfoy screamed and stood up so vehemently that the chair tipped. "Dad has connections in the Ministry of Magic. Even you must know what that is. He's also governor of Hogwarts. He can kick you out. Don't you dare challenge him or me, you filthy muggle." Nearly the entire class gasped for breath, and Yugi noticed Miss Granger exchanging looks with Harry, Ron, and Dean. They seemed to be worried about something. It was those glances that made Yugi notice that Hermione Granger already had her notebook on her desk and had been making notes until the fight between Draco Malfoy and Yugi broke out. Yugi looked at Malfoy, regretting that he wasn't any taller.
"I can help you if you want. I promise I won't harm him."
Atem offered. Let's not risk them noticing the differences, Yugi declined. People are suspicious enough as it is. Atem nodded and withdrew from the edge of Yugi's mind. Instead, he appeared next to him and sat down on the desk.
You're right. Just don't let them play with you.
They won't, Yugi replied to Ancient Spirit lowly and straightened his back. Mr. Malfoy, I believe detention will suit you just fine. Tonight, at 7, in my office. Be there. In addition, I'll take 10 points from Slytherin. Then Yugi turned to face Hermione Granger. Miss Granger, I believe I've said nothing of importance that you should be taking notes on. What exactly are you writing? Yugi walked towards her and snatched the piece of parchment that was in her notebooklet. He scanned over it and became pale as it dawned upon him what the letter was about. Atem, Yugi said, and the spirit swiftly got to his feet and walked towards Yugi. He read the letter over the shorter boy's shoulder and hissed when he saw what it was about. Miss Granger, Mr. Weasley, Mr. Potter, and Mr. Thomas can have lunch in my office. The 5 of us need a good conversation. I'll be keeping this one, Yugi told the 4 Gryffindors. He noticed Seamus Finnegan looking at his friend with confusion on his face. Why hadn't Dean Thomas inaugurated his best friend in his secret? All right, as Mr. Thomas already informed you, a man called Adolf Hitler took control of Germany in 1933. He aimed to change the country to a dictatorship that would rid itself from Jews, homosexuals, and gypsies. They carried anti-Semitic values, telling people that the Aryan race was superior to all others, and that especially Jews were the reason for the problems Germany had, actually for the problems of the world. Please take notes. Every student, including a grim Malfoy, opened their notebooklets and started to take notes as Yugi started telling. Many always wonder how Hitler succeeded in planting such terrible values in the German people's minds. Hitler might have been a terrible person, but he surely was smart. He focused on young people, knowing that the strength of a nation lays amongst them. Mostly people of your age. During the Nazi reign, 1933 to 1945, was the German youth exposed to an intensive propaganda. All Germany rectified after a Nazi party's dogma, and the focus was on youth. In school, students were brainwashed with Nazi ideas, and they were exposed to a strong pressure in their spare time to engage in the Hitler Youth. Hitler Youth is a key to understanding the Second World War. There was a Boy Scout-like Nazi youth movement whose purpose was to unify the youth under Nazi ideals and to prepare them for military life. All similar youth movements that existed before the war were taken over by the Hitler Youth. Eventually, it became almost mandatory for young people to be active members of the Hitler Youth. Those who stood outside were not allowed access to higher education and were often mobbed by their classmates, a bullying encouraged by the Hitler Youth leaders. The Hitler Youth indoctrinated young people to choose the new Nazism in front of their parents' old and outdated views and values. Everyone understands that this message went home with teenagers, especially as it could have serious consequences for the parents who tried to oppose. The message of the Hitler Youth was not particularly new. It was mostly old conservative remnants who mingled with the indoctrination of blind obedience and worship of the leader Hitler. According to the Hitler Youth, would the girls go dressed in a skirt and be submissive to men and boys. The boys, however, would be hard as steel. Hitler taught the young people that they belonged to a chosen nation, chosen generation, that they were the crown of creation that would bring mankind to paradise. In Nazi vocabulary was conscious slippage between humanity and the German nation. Paradise was the Nazi millennium promised by the Nazi leader Hitler, who became almost like a god in this bizarre cult. When the war then broke out, the German soldiers who were indoctrinated and trained in the Hitler Youth during their youth, often superior to their opponents both at the motivation, training, and capacity for individual initiative. During the war's last days, when all adults in Germany knew that the war was lost, it was the German children in uniform who continued to fight. Many of them died in the ruins of Berlin. Yugi stopped when he noticed that more than half the class had stopped taking notes. They were all gaping at him as if he was speaking a foreign language, and for a moment Yugi was afraid he had. "What?" he wondered. "That's terrible!" Tracy Davis exclaimed. "It is," said Yugi calmly. "That's why I am teaching you about this, so all of you understand what hatred could do. Now let me continue. At lunchtime that day, Yugi was for the first time in his office. He earlier always just used it to get from his room to the classroom. The reason Yugi didn't use his office was because he liked it a lot better to work with the pictures of his friends in front of him, and because students were supposed to come to him in his office if they wanted something. He didn't dare put any up in there. Now he had quickly changed the room. The walls had gotten a light blue color, and the floor was now a warm red sort of wood. The interior was now white, but anyone would notice that Yugi never there. Nothing personal decorated the room, not the smallest of things. Lunch hadn't even started when someone knocked on the door. "Come in," Yugi called and sat down. He had expected the door to open, but when it didn't, he stood up to check out the hallway. There was no one there. When he closed the door and turned around, he screamed out in terror and surprise. "My God, who are you?" In front of him stood a short creature with large tennis ball green eyes, bat-like ears, and a pencil-like nose. He was wearing a red sweater and washed-out neon green shorts. On his head, he wore a gigantic hat. When Yugi looked closer, he noticed that it wasn't one but a whole bunch of them. "Dobby is here with lunch, Professor, sir!" the creature exclaimed. "Who is Dobby?" Yugi wondered and looked around. "Me is Dobby, sir!" Dobby squeaked. Yugi laughed. "Okay, well, hello, Dobby. My name is Yugi, Yugimoto." Yugi held out a hand. "Nice to meet you, Professor, sir!" Dobby exclaimed and shook Yugi's hand with both his own. Then he clicked his fingers and food enough for 10 appeared on the white desk. "Dobby?" Yugi wondered. "Isn't that a bit much?" "Well," Dobby said, frowning, "perhaps, but the whole sounds like making food, and they usually make a bit too much. So it would be really great if you could take all this." "All right, but I won't promise we'll finish it all." Yugi laughed and shook his head. "Sir, Dobby has a question, though Dobby doesn't want to insult Professor, sir," Dobby said and played a bit with one of his ears as he fidgeted. "Call me Yugi and ask whatever you like. I promise I won't be angry." Yugi's smile had faltered a bit. He wondered exactly how much this elf knew. "Who are the people in the photographs? They don't move. Dobby has never seen unmoving pictures before." He ducked a bit as if opening a hit. "Those people were my friends," Yugi answered, his smile completely gone now. "Have you been in my room?" "Yes, sir. To clean, sir," the house elf answered, frightened. "Dobby is the only one who dares to come in there, sir." Yugi, who despite his promise had begun getting angry, was distracted by that. "Why does no one else dare to come in there? And don't call me sir. Yugi will do." "They fear him, Yugi, sir. They fear the other man, the old one," Dobby answered with a scared voice. "Don't be mad, please." "I'm not mad," Yugi said with a voice that proved the opposite. "Just surprised. What other man do they mean?" "The taller one with the red eyes and frightening the place. You call him a Tim," Dobby whispered, as if afraid that the walls would eavesdrop. "What?" Yugi exclaimed loudly. "How do you know?" "Sometimes he appears. Dobby can see him. He can even hear him. He frightens the house elves, Yugi, sir." Dobby didn't look afraid anymore. He had reached a point beyond terrified. "He is a very dark presence and lives in there." Dobby pointed a shaking finger toward the Millennium Puzzle. "Please tell me you heard that," Yugi asked Atem. "I certainly did. I wonder if he can hear us right now." Atem wondered curiously. "Dobby can hear him, Yugi, sir. He is talking to Yugimoto, sir, right now. Can't Yugi, sir, hear him?" Dobby was jumping around the room and pointing a finger towards Yugi. "Dobby can hear him!" "A little, oh please!" Yugi begged from the ancient spirit. Atem frowned mentally. "Why can't he hear you?" "Who cares?" Yugi said as the house elf came closer threateningly. "Do something!" Atem faded out next to Yugi. Immediately the elf's eyes were on him. "There he is! There he is, Yugi, sir!" "I know, Dobby, please calm down," Yugi begged. Dobby didn't even register the words, but jumped up on the chair behind the desk, waving his finger towards Atem. "There he is!" Dobby lifted one of the scissors and threw it towards Atem. The scissors hit their target, but of course they flew neatly through him. "Nice reminder that I'm already dead," Atem remarked with a bit of that vague self-humor that now and then appeared out of nowhere. "Dobby, calm down." Atem had such a great amount of authority in his voice that Dobby was unable to do anything else but stop yelling. Though afraid as he was, the elf stood on the chair, shivering. "Don't be afraid," Yugi said calmly. He was well aware that the former pharaoh wouldn't be able to calm such a frightened creature. He simply was too intimidating. Atem is my best friend. This didn't seem to calm Dobby much. He started to shake even worse. Won't Yugi, sir, protect Dobby from the darkness, sir? That darkness is not going to harm you, Yugi assured the terrified house elf. That darkness is guarded by us, so it won't harm anyone again. And I know Atem is scary, but he is a good person. Atem looked at Yugi and then bowed his head.
Thank you, Yugi.
Just saying as it is, Yugi said with a smile.
There is no need to fear me, Dobby. I have no reason to harm you, and neither has the darkness I bear,
Atem said in an attempt to be calming. Timmy once felt this kind of evil before, Yugi, sir. It was in the diary of he who must not be named. The same evil. Dobby started shivering even worse. Dobby and the other house elves feared that power. They do not want it in the school again. They do not want the dark man in the school. After all, house elves say that he could be a follower of he who must not be named. Atem's eyes filled with such an indescribable hatred that Yugi completely understood why the house elves didn't want him around. Dobby squeaked, jumped off the chair, and ran towards Yugi. The house elf clambered himself to Yugi's leg.
Easy, Dobby,
Atem soothed.
Yugi might have told you that the darkness that I guard is not meant to harm anyone ever again, but that's not true.
Dobby responded by clambering himself even harder to Yugi's leg, stopping the flow of blood in it. Yugi clenched his jaw, but didn't complain.
Let me tell you a secret,
the dark spirit started.
The reason we came here was because we were looking for a certain Death Eater. That Death Eater has done very terrible things to the people Yugi and I care about. Right now, these powers I possess have only one goal left, to take down that Death Eater and the one that leads him. If we get the chance, we will slay the man known as Lord Voldemort. Never would we join with him.
You hate he who must not be named? Dobby wondered and relinquished his grip around Yugi's leg. Yugi said in relief. Atem nodded in response to Dobby's question.
I hate him and his follower with every core of my non-existent body.
You're dead, Dobby noted. Atem nodded.
I've been dead for a very long time, Dobby.
But why are you in there? Dobby wondered and pointed towards the puzzle. How long have you been there?
Dobby, don't take it personal, but I don't think we should tell you too much. It's already too much that you know about my existence. Can all house elves hear and see me?
Atem wondered. He used a soft tone, determined not to scare the house elf. Dobby nodded. Yes, they can, sir, but they won't tell anyone if I tell them so.
Would you do that, Dobby?
Atem wondered kindly. Dobby will, Pharaoh, sir, Dobby said happily. He was clearly glad not to have been devoured by shadows. Atem and Yugi, on the other hand, weren't that happy with Dobby's answer. How do you know Atem was a pharaoh, Dobby? Yugi wondered cautiously. Had house elves had the ability to turn red, Dobby would add the cover of fully grown tomatoes. Well, Dobby claims pharaohs, sir. Dobby got a bit curious about all the decorations. Dobby learned.
Does anyone else know, Dobby?
Atem asked while saying a hasty prayer. No, just Dobby, pharaoh, sir, Dobby said alarmed.
Good. Just please don't tell anyone.
Atem begged. Dobby won't, pharaoh, sir, Dobby exclaimed, relieved that Atem wasn't angry.
Then just please stop calling me that. Forget I exist.
Atem requested with a heavy sigh.
Same for the other elves.
Oh, they won't! They are not free elves! They can't tell anyone! They have to keep the secrets they learn! Dobby is free elf! Dobby can wear clothes! Dobby spun around with joy when he said so. Is that why you are wearing all these clothes? Yugi asked, amused. Dobby nodded fiercely. Socks are Dobby's favorite, but Dobby likes sweaters too! Only that? Yugi asked when an idea slowly started to take shape in his head. Atem laughed at the idea and was silently glad that Dobby chased the star from Yugi. Yugi might never be the same cheerful, careless, and nice person he once was, but this place had surely had a positive impact on Yugi.
I believe we've got them in the smaller trunk with things we don't need here.
What? Dobby wondered. Is Pharaoh Sir talking to Dobby? No, Dobby, he's talking to me. You might be able to hear him when Atem and I communicate, but you can't hear me. Now, Dobby, only clothes, or jewelry too. Dobby frowned. What's jewelry? He sounded a bit suspicious, but also curious. Girls wear it a lot, Yugi said, as if it was the most obvious thing in the world. Atem took some steps towards the door that led to their room and gave Yugi a very displeased look. Yugi simply beamed at him.
It's not only girls,
The former pharaoh assured the house elf.
You see, when I was pharaoh, I used to have earrings. Considering I don't have a body anymore and Yugi simply refuses to take holes in his ears, there is absolutely no use in us keeping them.
Yugi's smile faltered at the thought of how Atem's clothes had ended up in this world. When Atem was about to enter the world of the dead, his soul had turned into who he truly was, a pharaoh, and thus he had the clothes fitting of one. When Lucius Malfoy attacked them, Atem had been hit first. The spell had been sent through him into the next world. In reply to that, the door had closed, leaving Atem to watch his friends die. Yugi didn't know why Lucius Malfoy hadn't killed him. Neither did he know why the Death Eater hadn't killed Mokuba and Rio. Luck, Yugi supposed, if that was what you wanted to call it. The same moment Yugi lifted the Millennium Puzzle again, the spirit of the ancient pharaoh had returned into it, leaving a pile consisting of the clothes he had been wearing. Among them, large golden earrings. Earrings? Dobby wondered. Are those these things you put in your ears? Yugi nodded and then smiled. I'll go and get them. Wait here. Yugi entered his room and dived under the bed to pull out a small trunk. When he opened it, he wished he hadn't. There, staring back at him, was the duel disc he hadn't used since the ritual duel. A split second, Yugi wondered if he still would be able to do equally well now as he had then. But he didn't truly doubt he would. He lifted the duel disc and put it next to the trunk. At the very bottom, he found a plastic bag with Atem's clothes. Inside that bag, there was a smaller one containing the jewelry that Atem had been wearing. It was only a small fortune. Yugi shook his head, reminding himself that this was nothing to what he had seen inside the palace. Yugi took the earrings out of the plastic bag and walked back to Dobby. Here they are, Yugi said, and sat down on one of the two chairs at the front of the desk. Dobby hopped up in the other one. They look heavy, the short creature noted. He reached out a finger to touch them, but withdrew when he realized what he was doing. No, it's okay. Here, fill them. Yugi dropped the 2 pieces of gold in Dobby's hands. They are heavy! Dobby yelped, surprised. They are very heavy indeed, sir. How could he give you them?
You get used to it,
Atem answered.
though when you take them off at night the first couple of times your ears hurt. Though that might not count for you, your ears are quite different.
I think it's insane, Yugi told Dobby. I've plainly refused to take holes in my ears just because of those. He pointed at the 2 things in Dobby's hands. Holes, sir? Dobby said, horrified, and put the pieces of gold on the desk. Do people actually make holes in their ears?
Yeah, they do. It doesn't hurt that much, though.
Atem reassured Dobby. Then he made a suggestion.
Some people do it themselves. If I, or Yugi perhaps, make some in yours, you can have them. If you don't like them, you can sell them and buy a whole lot of socks.
Doesn't it hurt? Dobby asked, wringing his hands.
Not if you do it correctly,
Atem said once again. Okay then, Dobby said, suddenly beaming. Dobby will be the first house elf to ever have gotten earrings from a pharaoh. Yugi and Atem laughed simultaneously. The house elf made them both in a good mood. Yugi went to get a needle, a candle, and a tissue from his room. Then he took a bite of apple and an ice cube from the many plates of food and bucket with pumpkin juice that Dobby had placed on the desk. First, Yugi started to instruct the nervous yet eager house elf. You numb one of your ears with this ice cube so you won't feel anything. Just pinch your ear to try if it is numb enough. Dobby did as instructed. When you think it's good enough, I'll hold a bit of apple behind your ear to keep it from bleeding too much. It will only bleed a bit. Humans can, in the beginning, only bear lightweight earrings, but house elves' ears are much stronger and should have no problem with these. While you numb your ear, I'll heat the needle. It will be both easier penetrate the skin when hot, and the heat will kill all the bacteria. The house elf squeaked eventually. The needle was hot, and Yugi gripped the quarter apple and held it against Dobby's ear. He prepared himself to penetrate the ear of the short creature with the funny hats when someone knocked on the door.
Oh no, I forgot about them,
Atem said hastily and withdrew into the puzzle. Who is it? Dobby wondered, curious. Wait a second, Yugi called towards the door, then turned towards Dobby. Those are a couple of students I have to talk to. Let's just finish this first. They can wait. Ready? Yugi didn't wait for an answer, but swiftly pushed the needle through Dobby's ear. Dobby, who had been unprepared, screamed out loud. Despite the fact that Dobby was a rather small creature, he had an incredible voice capacity, and Yugi was convinced that the entire castle had heard the scream. The result of the scream was that 4 figures came bursting into the office, wands raised. Luckily for Yugi, the 4 were clever enough to evaluate the situation rather than jump to conclusions. "What the?" Harry called out, panicked when he saw the rather odd scene in front of him. Yugi didn't react to the teens, but stayed calm and in the exact same spot as he was. He didn't think it would be a good idea to alarm the students further. "Did it hurt?" he asked Dobby calmly. To Yugi's surprise, the house elf shook his head. "No, Yugi, sir! Dobby was just surprised!" "Alright then," Yugi said with a smile. "Next one, too." Dobby nodded as the 4 teens were staring at the elf and the Japanese teacher, who were having a rather odd conversation in their ears. "Ready?" Yugi asked Dobby, and once again he didn't wait for the elf to realize what happened until it already had. Once again, Dobby gave a scream of surprise. Yugi saw Hermione Granger close her eyes in distaste. Mr. Potter frowned, but none of the 4 said anything. "Is Dobby done?" Dobby wondered and sounded in relief when Yugi nodded. "Here, try them," Yugi suggested and gave Dobby the earrings. "It'll be something different. How about it?" "Thanks," Dobby squeaked, and Yugi was glad that Dobby was subtle enough not to mention the Pharaoh in any way. Then the house elf turned to face the 4 Gryffindors. "Is Harry Potter, sir, in trouble?" "Dobby, could you leave us, please? I have to talk to them in private. Though do come again sometime. It was nice," Yugi told the house elf. Dobby wasn't pleased, but he obeyed. With a little nod of his head, Dobby was gone. Yugi stood up and looked at the 4 bewildered teenagers. He placed his hands on the desk and looked behind him at the food. Then he said, "Good that the house elves prepared this much. We'll have a long talk."